The morning sun cast a warm glow over the fine white sands of a Hawaiian beach, creating a scene straight out of paradise. The sunlight, gentle and golden, shimmered across the crystal-clear waters, making each wave sparkle like glass. The gentle waves caressed the shore, creating a soothing sound that blended seamlessly with the tranquil surroundings. Amidst this serene landscape, two figures, radiating joy, walked hand in hand along the beach, a newly couple basking in the beauty of life and love. Marcus and Alana, a black couple, had overcome countless hardships and trials to reach this beautiful day. Being black in America, they had experienced their share of prejudice and bias from society. But their love, a bond stronger than any prejudice or hardship, had brought them here to their dream honeymoon in Hawaii. Marcus was a tall, steady man with warm, determined eyes. From the first time they met, his sincere gaze and gentle voice had left an unforgettable impression on Alana. Not only was he a devoted partner, but he was also her constant companion, her protector whenever she felt vulnerable. Marcus carried a quiet strength and patience, traits that had helped him endure many challenges in life. Though he wasn't one for grand declarations, his every action was a testament to his unconditional love for Alana. Alana, on the other hand, was vibrant, with a smile as bright as the morning sun and a laugh as pure as chimes in the wind. She was passionate and deeply compassionate. Alana possessed an inner strength, one that had been honed through life's trials. She believed, with unwavering faith, that despite life's hardships, kindness and love could weather any storm. In Marcus, she had found a kindred soul, and from that bond, their love had blossomed, fierce and unbreakable like trees reaching for sunlight. In the dazzling light of Hawaii, Alana held Marcus's hand tightly, her eyes sparkling with happiness. She leaned into him, listening to the heartbeat of the man she loved. "I still can't believe we're here together on this beautiful Hawaiian beach. It's like a dream come true," she whispered, her voice tinged with awe and gratitude. Marcus smiled, tightening his grip on her hand, feeling his own heart swell with happiness at her words. "To me, anywhere with you is paradise," he replied, his eyes filled with adoration and respect. They sat down on the soft sands, watching the waves roll in as they savored this peaceful moment. Marcus wrapped his arm around Alana, feeling her warmth as she rested her head on his shoulder. Each second spent together made their hearts beat a little faster, as if the whole world had vanished, leaving only the two of them. They shared memories of laughter and tears, recalling the obstacles they had overcome to reach this day, and together they painted visions of a happy future. Alana closed her eyes, allowing the rhythm of the waves and the soft breeze to fill her senses, letting the peace wash over her. This was not just a honeymoon, it was a moment of realization that she had found her true life partner. Marcus was her rock, the one person she could trust with all her heart, someone she could lean on through life's storms. And she, in turn, would be his cheerleader, his companion in every joy and sorrow. In this peaceful moment, they sat side by side, saying nothing, simply feeling the overwhelming love pulsing through them. They knew that this love, deep and enduring, would be the steady foundation of their future. Here on this gorgeous Hawaiian beach, Marcus and Alana had not only found tranquility but a deep belief in their future together, a belief that, no matter what came their way, they would face it side by side, as partners bound by a love that would carry them through all of life's storms. As the waves lapped at the shore and Marcus and Alana savored their time in paradise, a figure emerged in the distance, walking along the beach with an air of authority that stood out against the casual ease of the surroundings. Dressed in a pressed uniform and reflective sunglasses, the police officer walked with a rigid, calculated stride, his eyes scanning the people on the beach, as though evaluating whether they belonged. The officer's expression hardened as his gaze fell upon Marcus and Alana, a black couple sharing a quiet moment together in the sand. In an instant, his posture became more rigid, and he directed his course toward them. Marcus noticed the officer approaching before Alana did, his years of life experience sharpening his instinct for potential trouble. He gently squeezed Alana's hand, alerting her to the officer's presence as he approached them, his face unreadable behind his sunglasses but his jaw set in a firm, tense line. Alana looked up, sensing the shift in atmosphere as the officer stopped directly in front of them, casting a shadow over their idyllic moment. "Good morning, officer," Marcus greeted calmly, his voice respectful but firm, hoping to establish a respectful interaction from the start. He was used to these encounters, knew how to handle himself, and felt confident he could diffuse whatever assumptions the officer might be making. The officer's lips twitched into a slight sneer as he removed his sunglasses, revealing cold, scrutinizing eyes that looked Marcus and Alana up and down. "Good morning," he echoed, his tone dripping with sarcasm as he glanced around the nearly empty stretch of beach. "I didn't expect to see people like you here, enjoying this part of town." His words, though subtly veiled, struck with a force that Marcus and Alana both felt immediately. Alana stiffened, instinctively reaching for Marcus's hand for reassurance. Marcus, however, kept his expression neutral, refusing to let the officer see any reaction that might fuel his bias. "Is there a problem, officer?" Marcus asked, maintaining his steady composure. He didn't want this to escalate, especially not here, not now, during what was supposed to be one of the happiest moments of their lives. The officer took a step closer, his eyes narrowing as he looked between the two of them. "Problem? Well, that depends," he replied, his voice laced with insinuation. "This is a place for families and good folks to relax. Not exactly the spot for troublemakers or drifters. You wouldn't be causing any trouble here now, would you?" Alana felt her pulse quicken, anger bubbling beneath her calm exterior, but she stayed silent, letting Marcus handle the situation. She knew that challenging the officer openly could only make things worse. She squeezed Marcus's hand tighter, drawing strength from his calm. Marcus held the officer's gaze, refusing to be intimidated. "We're just here on our honeymoon, officer," he explained evenly. "We're not causing any trouble, just enjoying the beach like everyone else." The officer's sneer deepened, and he crossed his arms, giving them a look of thinly veiled disdain. "Honeymoon, huh? That's nice," he said slowly, as though doubting the very possibility of their story. He tilted his head, examining them as if they were an anomaly, something out of place. "So, where are you folks from?" "We're from Baltimore," Marcus replied, remaining courteous despite the growing tension. The officer raised an eyebrow, his mouth curling in a mocking smile. "Baltimore? That explains a lot," he muttered under his breath, though loud enough for them to hear. "You know, we don't get a lot of tourists like you from places like Baltimore. You must be doing pretty well for yourselves to afford a trip out here, huh?" Alana's patience began to wear thin. She shifted, trying to keep her tone polite. "Is there a problem with us being here, officer?" she asked, unable to keep the frustration from edging into her voice. The officer's face hardened, and he looked at her as though her question itself was an act of defiance. "Problem?" he repeated, his tone growing icier. "You're on a public beach in my jurisdiction, so I have every right to make sure everyone here is in the right place, if you know what I mean." Marcus felt his jaw clench, but he kept his composure. He knew this type of person, the kind who saw people like him and Alana as second-class citizens, who felt entitled to enforce his prejudices under the guise of authority. The officer continued, his voice laced with barely concealed contempt. "So why don't you both go ahead and show me some ID, just so I can verify your story?" Marcus sighed inwardly, understanding that any resistance could escalate the situation further. He reached into his pocket to retrieve his ID, his movements slow and deliberate to avoid alarming the officer. He handed his ID over, keeping his gaze level and unflinching. The officer scrutinized the ID as though expecting to find some evidence of wrongdoing. "And you, miss?" he demanded, holding out his hand for Alana's ID. Alana hesitated for a split second before handing over her ID, her expression calm but defiant. She wasn't about to let this man intimidate her on her honeymoon. The officer inspected their IDs with an exaggerated sense of scrutiny, flipping them over as though they were suspicious documents. After a prolonged pause, he handed them back with a mocking smirk. "Interesting. You both check out for now," he said, his tone implying that he still doubted their right to be there. Marcus and Alana exchanged a glance, both sensing that this interaction was far from over. Just as they thought the officer might move on, he took another step closer, invading their personal space. "But I'm not convinced," he added with a hint of menace in his voice. "Why don't we make sure everything's on the level here? Let's take a little ride down to the station, where we can sort all this out properly." Alana's heart sank as she realized the officer was intent on humiliating them further. She wanted to argue, to stand up for herself and Marcus, but she knew that doing so could make things worse. She looked to Marcus, her eyes filled with a mixture of anger and helplessness. Marcus gave her hand a reassuring squeeze, his expression calm but firm. "We haven't done anything wrong, officer. We're just here on vacation, and we'd like to enjoy our time in peace." The officer's expression darkened, and he reached for his radio. "I think you two need to come with me," he said coldly. "Let's see if your story holds up back at the station." With a sinking feeling, Marcus and Alana watched as a police car pulled up nearby, and the officer gestured for them to get inside. The beautiful beach, their dream honeymoon, was now tainted by the shadow of this unjust encounter. As they climbed into the back of the police car, the realization hit them hard: they were being taken in not for anything they'd done, but because of who they were. The police car began to drive away from the beach, taking them further from their joyful day. But as Marcus sat beside Alana, he felt a quiet resolve growing within him. This wasn't the end of the story. Far from it. He knew that soon enough this officer would learn a truth that would change everything. As the police car pulled away from the beach, Marcus and Alana sat in silence, feeling the weight of injustice pressing down on them. The officer's smug expression as he drove seemed to radiate satisfaction, as though he had accomplished some righteous task. The once serene beauty of Hawaii now felt distant, replaced by the cold, harsh reality of racial discrimination that had ensnared them. The officer, still glancing at them through the rearview mirror with a look of disdain, finally broke the silence. "You know," he said in a patronizing tone, "people like you think you can just show up wherever you want, act like you belong. But the truth always comes out." His words stung, each sentence filled with an implicit accusation, as though their mere presence on the beach was a crime. Marcus took a deep breath, keeping his gaze steady. He'd been through situations like this before, but it didn't make it any easier. Alana's hand gripped his tightly, her fingers cold, her body tense with anger and humiliation. He could feel her frustration and pain, and it broke his heart that she had to experience this, especially now, during what should have been the happiest time of their lives. After a few minutes, the police car arrived at the station, where several officers glanced curiously at the couple as they were led out of the car. Their expressions varied from disinterest to mild surprise, but none questioned the actions of their fellow officer. They simply accepted his judgment as if it were indisputable. Marcus and Alana were guided into a small, stark room, devoid of comfort or warmth. The officer gestured for them to sit, his face still twisted with the same disdainful smirk. "Let's get one thing clear," he said, crossing his arms as he looked down at them. "I'm giving you both a chance here. If there's anything you're hiding, any reason why you're really here, now's the time to come clean." Alana's face flushed with indignation, and she looked up at him, her voice filled with frustration. "We've told you already, officer. We're here on our honeymoon. We saved for this trip for years. We're not hiding anything." The officer let out a derisive chuckle, as if her words were the punchline of some cruel joke. "Honeymoon, right?" he scoffed. "People like you, spending money to come to a place like this? Forgive me if I find that hard to believe." Marcus's patience was wearing thin, but he kept his voice calm. "Officer, we have nothing to hide. We've done nothing wrong. We're just here to celebrate our marriage and enjoy our time together." The officer sneered, looking at them as though they were beneath him. "Funny how people always say that," he muttered. "You people always think you can play the system, bend the rules to suit yourselves. Not on my watch." The door opened briefly as another officer walked in, casting a quick, concerned glance at the situation but saying nothing. The officer who'd brought them in ignored his colleague, instead focusing his attention back on Marcus and Alana with an intensity that felt almost threatening. As the interrogation wore on, Marcus noticed a small crowd gathering outside the room. Curious onlookers, fellow officers, and even a few civilians watched with a mix of interest and disapproval. Some seemed uncomfortable, casting furtive glances at one another, sensing that the situation was not as straightforward as the officer had made it seem. One older woman, standing near the door, frowned as she observed the scene. She turned to one of the other officers nearby and asked, "Isn't this a bit much? They don't look like criminals to me." But her words fell on deaf ears, and the officer shrugged, dismissing her concern. "It's none of our business," he muttered, his gaze avoiding the couples. Inside the room, Alana struggled to hold back tears, her hands shaking slightly as she tried to compose herself. Marcus could feel her pain, her frustration, and he wished he could protect her from this. He knew that if he showed even a hint of anger, it would only reinforce the officer's prejudice. They were trapped, powerless to defend themselves against assumptions and stereotypes. The officer continued his barrage of thinly veiled accusations, questioning every detail of their story, as though he was determined to uncover some hidden truth. "So, you're from Baltimore," he said, his tone filled with contempt. "And you can just afford a vacation to Hawaii. Must be nice. What do you two do for a living?" Marcus took a steadying breath. "I'm in federal service," he replied, choosing his words carefully. "And my wife works in education." The officer laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "Federal service, huh? That's convenient, he sneered. You think throwing out some fancy-sounding job title is going to make me believe your story? You expect me to believe that you're anything more than... Before he could finish, Alana, who had been quietly enduring the humiliation, looked up with a fierce determination in her eyes. We don't have to prove anything to you, she said firmly, her voice trembling but filled with courage. We came here to celebrate our love, and we've done nothing wrong. The officer's face twisted with anger, his control slipping as he took a step closer, towering over her. Watch your tone, miss, he growled. You're already in enough trouble. Don't make it worse. Marcus tensed, ready to intervene if necessary, but he knew that any resistance would only escalate the situation. He placed a comforting hand on Alana's shoulder, a silent reassurance that he was there for her, even as they faced this ordeal together. Outside the room, the murmurs of disapproval grew louder. Some of the onlookers began whispering among themselves, uncomfortable with the officer's treatment of the couple. A young man with a camera phone discreetly began recording, capturing the officer's aggressive demeanor and the clear signs of racial bias in his behavior. Back in the room, the officer, oblivious to the growing attention, continued his tirade. People like you think you can just show up anywhere, like you belong. But this is my jurisdiction, and I decide who belongs here. Marcus felt a surge of anger rise within him, but he forced himself to remain calm. He wasn't going to let this man strip away his dignity or his composure. He met the officer's gaze, his expression resolute. We belong here as much as anyone else, he said firmly. We've broken no laws, and we've given you no reason to doubt us. The officer's eyes narrowed, his face darkening with anger. He seemed almost taken aback by Marcus's calm defiance, as though he hadn't expected him to stand up for himself. For a moment, he faltered, unsure of how to proceed. But then he sneered, regaining his confidence. Well, we'll see about that, he said, reaching for his radio. I'm taking you both in for further questioning. Maybe some time in a cell will help you remember the truth. The color drained from Alana's face as the realization sank in. This man was determined to humiliate them, to make them feel small and powerless. She clung to Marcus's hand, drawing strength from his steady presence, even as fear and frustration threatened to overwhelm her. As the officer called for backup, a sense of dread settled over them. They had done nothing wrong, yet they were being treated like criminals, simply because of the color of their skin. The injustice of it all was almost unbearable, but Marcus held his head high, refusing to let this man break his spirit. The whispers from the crowd outside grew louder, and more people began recording, their phones capturing the officer's every word, every gesture of contempt. The bystanders, once passive observers, now seemed to sense the gravity of the situation, their expressions shifting from curiosity to concern, from indifference to empathy. But the officer was oblivious, too focused on asserting his power to notice the mounting disapproval around him. He gestured toward the door, signaling for another officer to escort Marcus and Alana to the holding area. As they were led out of the room, Marcus caught a glimpse of the crowd, their sympathetic eyes meeting his. In that moment, he felt a glimmer of hope. They weren't alone in this fight. People were watching, and the truth would come to light. The officer's words echoed in his mind, each one a reminder of the prejudice they had endured. But Marcus knew that this wasn't the end of the story. He had a strength within him that no one could take away, a resilience born of countless battles faced and overcome. And as he walked with Alana by his side, he knew that they would emerge from this ordeal stronger than ever, determined to stand up for justice, for themselves, and for all those who had faced the same cruel prejudice. As they approached the holding area, Marcus held Alana's hand tightly, his gaze steady, his spirit unbroken. This was far from over, and he would make sure that the officer and the world would soon understand the truth. As Marcus and Alana were escorted into the police station, they could feel every eye in the room upon them. The room fell silent, with police officers and a few civilians exchanging glances. Some looked with curiosity, others with discomfort, sensing that something was amiss in the situation. But the officer who had arrested them, Officer Reynolds, was unbothered, leading the couple with a smug expression, as though he'd made some sort of righteous accomplishment. The desk sergeant looked up from his paperwork, eyes widening slightly when he saw Marcus and Alana in custody. He opened his mouth, as though he was about to ask a question, but caught sight of the resolute look on Officer Reynolds' face, and closed it again. He, too, seemed to trust that his colleague had a valid reason for bringing the couple in. Reynolds shoved Marcus and Alana forward slightly, ensuring they felt his power one last time as he pushed them toward the bench in the holding area. "Sit tight," he sneered, still reveling in his supposed victory. Alana shot Marcus a look, squeezing his hand tightly for reassurance. Though her face was calm, her eyes were filled with a mixture of hurt and frustration, struggling to understand why this was happening to them. Marcus gave her a small nod, trying to keep her spirits up. Now, Reynolds began, pacing in front of them as though he were putting on a performance for the room. "Why don't you tell me again why you're really here? I'd hate for you to forget any details that might come back to bite you." A couple of younger officers exchanged glances, their discomfort growing with every word that spilled from Reynolds' mouth. It was clear that some of them found his tone and demeanor inappropriate, but none dared to speak up against a fellow officer, let alone in front of the entire station. One officer, a woman with a sympathetic look in her eyes, approached the desk sergeant and murmured, "This doesn't seem right. They don't look like they've done anything wrong." The sergeant gave a hesitant nod but remained quiet, unwilling to interfere just yet. Reynolds continued, addressing the crowd that had formed. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced theatrically, "these two fine folks thought they could do as they pleased in our community without consequence." His words dripped with sarcasm and contempt, each one designed to make Marcus and Alana feel small and unwelcome. Finally, Marcus took a deep breath, unable to endure Reynolds' attitude any longer. "Officer," he began, his voice steady, "I think it's time you understand who I am." Reynolds chuckled, feigning interest. "Oh, is that so? Well, by all means enlighten us, Mr. I'm above the law." Marcus reached into his pocket slowly, pulling out a black leather wallet and flipping it open to reveal his badge, an unmistakable emblem of his position as an FBI special agent. The badge gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights of the station, its authority evident to anyone who knew its weight. The silence that followed was profound, heavy with shock and disbelief. Reynolds' smirk faltered as his eyes fixed on the badge, his brain struggling to catch up with what he was seeing. His face drained of color as he realized the enormity of his mistake. "FBI," he stammered, his voice suddenly weak, barely more than a whisper. Marcus nodded, keeping his gaze locked onto Reynolds with a steely intensity that made the other officer squirm. "That's right. Special Agent Marcus Hill, FBI." The revelation seemed to ripple through the station, sending shockwaves of disbelief across the room. The crowd of officers and onlookers had gathered close enough to see the badge, their eyes widening as they registered Marcus's authority. The female officer who had spoken up earlier covered her mouth in astonishment, her gaze flicking from Marcus to Reynolds. Other officers shot each other looks, some whispering among themselves as they tried to process the scene. It was a rare and sobering moment for everyone there, watching an FBI agent subjected to the very prejudice they claimed to fight against. The desk sergeant, looking utterly stunned, took a step forward. "Agent Hill, I had no idea." His voice was tinged with remorse, an apology unspoken but clearly implied. Marcus nodded, his expression unwavering. "And that's the problem, Sergeant," he said, his voice carrying a quiet, unyielding strength. "You assumed you knew who we were just by looking at us. And you allowed this officer to treat us like criminals without any reason or evidence." Reynolds, still frozen in place, seemed to be in a state of shock, unable to reconcile his prejudice with the truth in front of him. His mouth opened and closed as though he were trying to say something, but no words came. Finally, Marcus broke the silence, addressing Reynolds directly. "You didn't even give us a chance to explain ourselves. You assumed we were up to no good because of our skin color, and you used your position of power to humiliate and degrade us." His voice was calm, but each word was laced with a quiet fury that made everyone in the room shiver. Reynolds looked down, his face red with shame and embarrassment, unable to meet Marcus's gaze. The reality of his actions was crashing down on him, the consequences of his prejudice exposed for everyone to see. The chief of police, who had been alerted to the scene, entered the room, his face a mask of concern as he took in the situation. After a quick scan of the room, he focused on Marcus and Alana, his tone measured but apologetic. "Agent Hill," he said, extending a hand. "I'm Chief Sullivan. On behalf of this station, I want to personally apologize for what's happened here. This is not how we conduct ourselves, and I assure you that this will be addressed." Marcus shook his hand, his expression softening slightly. "Thank you, Chief. I appreciate that." His voice was still firm, but there was a hint of relief that someone in the station was willing to take responsibility. The chief turned to Reynolds, his face hardening. "Officer Reynolds, in my office." "Now." Reynolds swallowed, his face pale and his hands trembling as he nodded. He cast one last, desperate look around the room, but no one would meet his gaze. The same officers who had watched him with silent approval minutes earlier now looked away, their expressions filled with a mixture of disappointment and disapproval. As Reynolds slunk away, the room seemed to exhale collectively, the tension finally dissipating. Marcus and Alana were left standing in the center of the station, the crowd parting around them with a newfound respect. Some of the officers offered murmured apologies, their voices tinged with regret. Alana, still holding Marcus's hand, leaned into him, feeling the weight of the ordeal finally lift. They shared a quiet moment, their love and resilience unshaken despite the adversity they'd faced. The young officer who had recorded the scene approached them, her expression one of quiet admiration. "Agent Hill," she said, her voice respectful, "if you need anything, we're here for you." She cast a look toward the other officers, who nodded in agreement, their solidarity evident. Marcus gave her a nod of appreciation, feeling a glimmer of hope in the midst of the injustice. He knew that their experience might inspire change, however small, in the hearts of those who had witnessed it. As he and Alana left the station, they walked hand in hand, their love and unity stronger than ever. The challenges they'd faced together had only deepened their bond, and they knew that whatever lay ahead, they would face it side by side. The memory of Reynolds' humiliation, his prejudice exposed, lingered in the air, a reminder to everyone in that station of the consequences of unchecked discrimination. In the days following the incident, the shockwaves reverberated through the community and the police department alike. News of the wrongful arrest of an FBI agent based on racial prejudice quickly spread, making headlines and igniting public outrage. The police department, now under intense scrutiny, was forced to open an internal investigation. Officer Reynolds was immediately placed on suspension pending review, and his actions were carefully examined by a disciplinary board. The investigation left no stone unturned, unearthing not only the racial prejudice that had fueled his treatment of Marcus and Alana, but also revealing a troubling pattern of biased behavior in Reynolds' record. At the station, the atmosphere was tense. Officers whispered in the hallways, discussing the fallout of Reynolds' behavior and what it meant for their department. Many of them felt conflicted, grappling with the fact that such prejudice had existed among them, largely unchecked, for so long. It was a painful reckoning, but one that they realized was necessary to address the biases that had been allowed to fester. After days of intense public pressure, the police chief organized a press conference to address the situation. Cameras flashed as reporters from local and national outlets crowded into the room, eager for a statement. Chief Sullivan, standing at the podium, looked visibly strained. This incident had exposed a troubling reality within his department, and it was his responsibility to acknowledge it. Clearing his throat, Chief Sullivan began, his voice somber but firm. "Today I stand before you not only as the chief of police, but as a representative of this community. What happened to Special Agent Marcus Hill and his wife Alana is a disgrace to our department and an affront to the values we claim to uphold. Officer Reynolds' conduct was unacceptable, and we are committed to ensuring that justice is served and that such behavior has no place in our ranks." Sullivan went on to announce that Reynolds would be facing formal charges of misconduct and racial discrimination. He expressed a deep apology to Marcus and Alana on behalf of the entire department, promising comprehensive reforms to prevent such incidents from happening again. Marcus and Alana, watching the broadcast from their living room, felt a sense of closure. Although the experience had left scars, they knew that this moment was bigger than just their own story. They'd become a catalyst for change, forcing the department to confront its own biases and take steps toward accountability. Marcus, despite everything, remained composed. The experience had tested his patience and resolve, yet he refused to let anger consume him. He knew that systemic change required patience, persistence, and a willingness to challenge wrongdoings through lawful channels. Later that week, Chief Sullivan visited Marcus personally, seeking a face-to-face apology. Sitting across from each other, Sullivan expressed his regret for how the situation had been handled and acknowledged the bravery it took for Marcus to remain calm under such unfair treatment. "I can't begin to imagine how that felt," Chief Sullivan said, his tone filled with genuine remorse. "We failed you and your wife in a fundamental way, and for that I am truly sorry. If there's anything we can do to repair this damage, please let us know." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "Thank you, Chief Sullivan," he replied. "My wife and I just want to see meaningful change. This isn't about revenge or punishment, it's about ensuring that others won't have to go through what we did." Moved by Marcus's response, Sullivan pledged to initiate mandatory diversity and sensitivity training across the department. He assured Marcus that Reynolds would face appropriate disciplinary action, but more importantly, that the department would take steps to prevent any officer from wielding their power unjustly. As the public apology circulated, members of the community felt a surge of hope. Marcus and Ilana's story was one of resilience, proving that it was possible to stand up against injustice and inspire accountability. Their ordeal had not been in vain. They had sparked a movement toward understanding and empathy, a step toward bridging the divide that racial prejudice so often widened. In the following months, Officer Reynolds faced not only legal repercussions but also the loss of respect from his peers and community. His badge, once a symbol of pride, had been tarnished by his own actions, and he was left to confront the consequences of his prejudice alone. The shame of his actions served as a lasting reminder to others within the department that abuse of power, fueled by hatred or discrimination, would not be tolerated. For Marcus and Ilana, the incident became a powerful story to share with others, a reminder that, even in the face of prejudice, dignity and integrity could prevail. Marcus, still devoted to his work in the FBI, continued to use his position to champion justice, using his personal experience to inspire his colleagues and foster conversations about fairness and equality. Their experience echoed across the country, resonating with people who had faced similar discrimination. Marcus and Ilana had managed to transform a moment of hardship into a beacon of hope, shedding light on the changes needed within the very systems meant to protect all citizens. With each passing day, Marcus's impact extended beyond the incident, leaving a legacy that would inspire others to stand up for their rights. Together, he and Ilana became symbols of resilience, a testament to the power of love, respect, and the unwavering pursuit of justice.